this is Vivianite. It is an incredibly rare crystal that is only found in a couple very specific contexts. It is a hydrated iron phosphate crystal, meaning it has iron, phosphorus, and water involved in its structure. Now, initially, the Vivianite crystals are colorless, but the mineral oxidizes very, very rapidly, which changes its color to provide this dark green color. It can also come in other similar colors, including like a teal, a dark blue, a really dark green, or an almost black color, depending on the levels of oxidation as well as what other minerals happen to be present in the structure. Now, in addition to being a very interesting looking and beautiful crystal, the formation is pretty much the most interesting part of this, how and where it is found. One of the main places where Vivianite is formed is in fossils such as this one, which is a fossilized bivalve. You can see up here in this hole over there, that is a good amount of natural Vivianite crystals that had formed on this fossil. The calcium and phosphate found in the original shell are what contribute to the formation of Vivianite, and that formation is not purely on fossils. It can be also found on other things, which gives it its other name, the coffin crystal. Because Vivianite in fact can also form in and on coffins, as well as in and on the contents of said coffins. This up here looks to be a tooth with Vivianite crystal growths in it that was found growing crystals. When a corpse is buried in a coffin made partially or entirely of iron, that allows the chemical reactions to take place that are needed in order to form Vivianite. The iron is provided by the iron coffin, and the phosphorus and everything else is provided by the decomposition processes of the dead body, which causes these coffin crystals to be formed. Now, like you can see in this image up here, they're not those large dramatic crystals like I showed in the previous pictures. It's more like the crystals are just kind of filling in spaces within crevices and other things. Now, like I said before, Vivianite is quite rare. Not every iron coffin will form Vivianite. It is not a very common thing that happens. This also contributes to make Vivianite very expensive to buy. It's also a very, very delicate crystal with a Mohs hardness of less than 2, so it's very fragile. It's not very good in jewelry, and while it has been historically used as a paint pigment, again, it's not a very good pigment, so it doesn't have a lot of uses other than being decorative. Regardless of how much functionality it may or may not have, it is still a very pretty crystal that is found growing in unlikely places, which just makes it even cooler in my opinion. I feel like we haven't talked about something properly, like, creepy in a while, so let's talk about bobbit worms. This gorgeous specimen up here is a bobbit worm. They are a type of bristle worm in the polychaete group that is found largely in the Atlantic Ocean, but also found some places in the Indo-Pacific Ocean. And they likely get the name bobbit worm from the case of Lorena Bobbit, where she performed a little impromptu castration. And you know what? Good for her. Now, these worms are found typically at the sea floor or occasionally in coral reefs, where they are ambush predators, just kind of hanging out until they find something they want to eat. They have a number of quite sensitive antennae coming up from the front of their head, and when those antennae sense something like a small fish or other crustacean, then they pounce with those massive, incredibly powerful jaws. These jaws are so powerful, in fact, that they have been observed to cut their prey just entirely in half. Good for her. They can come in a variety of different colors, including black, brown, kind of tan-ish, or purple, usually with this very honestly very pretty, gorgeous rainbow iridescent shine. They're also incredibly large, larger than any worm has any right to be. The longest specimen ever found was just under 10 feet long. Yeah, feet. Now, they're not strictly carnivorous. They will eat pretty much anything they can get their massive jaws on. Largely live prey, but not exclusively. They will eat things like algae and other plant matter, as well as scavenge for just any material that they can get. Now, fully grown adult bobbit worms don't typically have any natural predators in the wild. Some larger fish may try to tangle with it, but again, those jaws are not something that you want to mess with. Additionally, since they are polychaetes and bristleworms, they also have very, very good regeneration abilities. You can kind of cut a bobbit worm into multiple different pieces and it will regenerate up into a new, mostly full bobbit worm. They're also occasionally found in aquariums, however, not usually intentionally. They can sneak into aquariums in plants and substrates and other stuff and make a home there and start to grow, and are apparently incredibly hard to get rid of without dismantling the entire tank and disrupting the entire aquarium ecosystem. They're also known for preying on fish in aquariums and will eat fish that you want to be there, so they're kind of just a pain in the ass. And if these guys weren't overpowered enough, they are also mildly venomous. Now, the venom isn't strong enough to harm a human permanently, however, it is incredibly uncomfortable, reportedly, causing kind of a painful stinging and then numbness sensation, and in some cases it has caused permanent or semi-permanent numbness around the site of the sting. Also, I'm not entirely sure whether or not it's just the bristles that are toxic or if the jaws also have a venom, but either way, it would not be pleasant at all to get bit by one of these things. And while they're not typically aggressive, they won't go out of their way to bite humans. If they're like stepped on or someone's trying to remove them from, say, an aquarium setting, they will bite, and again, not a very fun experience. And while not typically fast-moving overall, they do have a very, very fast strike speed and retreat speed as well. That is typically used to ambush prey items, but can also be used to retreat incredibly quickly if someone is trying to harass this worm, such as remove it or eat it. Now, all of this to say, I like these worms a lot. They're incredibly strange looking, they're pretty creepy, they have a very nice rainbow iridescent shimmer, which I am always a big fan of. They have such incredible survival tactics, they're one of the most overpowered organisms out there, and they're definitely up there with one of my favorite invertebrates. I just think they're so cool. Let's talk about what is probably objectively the weirdest mammal on Earth, the naked mole rat. Now, while objectively this thing looks super weird, pretty much every other thing about this guy is weirder than its appearance. They are found in the Horn of Africa, largely in Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia. They spend pretty much the entirety of their life underground, and only a select few come up from their extensive tunnel system for a select few reasons. They're also the only known cold-blooded mammal, so they are ectothermic and they don't regulate their own body temperature individually. They have to do it from the environment like reptiles. They're also one of only two known eusocial animals, the other one being another type of mole rat. Now, eusocial is kind of the hive structure that is seen in ants, wasps, and termites. That's where they have one central queen that does all of the reproduction with a couple select males, and pretty much the rest of her colony is her offspring. and that is incredibly rare in anything but insects, and even among the insect world, it's not the most common thing, so it's quite weird that this mammal does that. And with the kind of eusocial structure and mammalian genetics, inbreeding is quite common, and so the genetic diversity kind of suffers. However, there is a solution to that by certain select males are bred to have the urge to leave their colony and go find new colonies in order to diversify the gene pool. Naked mole rats are also the longest lived of any rodents, with the oldest wild individual maxing out at, I think, 32 years. And the oldest captive individual is pushing 40 and still going strong. So we don't actually know the true lifespan of the naked mole rat, how long they can actually live in captivity without threats from predators. In that same vein, most naked mole rats don't actually show physical signs of aging. They don't seem to die from old age. Now, their genetic markers, there were a couple studies done that found that their DNA does in fact show regular aging markers, but the actual rodents themselves don't seem to age, and old age has not been a confirmed cause of death in, as far as I'm aware, any naked mole rats that we've seen. They're also immune to cancer. They just straight up cannot get cancer. Their cells have a very strong mechanism against it, which is being used in studies to try to prevent human cancers. And they just straight up do not have any pain receptors in their skin. They just don't feel pain from things like cuts and bruises and blisters and all of that. I'm sure they can feel pain from other things. It's just their skin, like if you pinch or something, it doesn't hurt. Which is, again, being researched to see what mechanisms they have to avoid pain and see if we can use it. And apparently they're capable of running backwards just as fast as they're capable of running forwards, which is just freaky. Let's talk about antimony. Antimony is an element on the periodic table. It's naturally occurring in the Earth's crust and is this kind of rather brittle silvery metal. It has many industrial uses and is used to make a bunch of different compounds and other stuff. However, it is also incredibly toxic. It has a mechanism of action quite similar to how arsenic works, and kind of the main problem it causes is stops the activity of a bunch of different enzymes. It also destroys your red blood cells, which is an entire other problem. Symptoms include things like stomach issues, as well as nausea, vomiting, bloody diarrhea, as well as eventual kidney failure, which is one of the larger causes of death due to antimony poisoning. The lethal dose for antimony does vary quite widely between individuals, but is usually between 100 to 200 grams. There's also no real treatment or antidote to antimony poisoning, mainly just supportive therapies such as getting your stomach pumped and trying to get the antimony to move through your system as quickly as possible, and if necessary, blood transfusions due to the fact that it destroys your blood. Now, antimony has been used as a poison, but also has other historical uses dating back even thousands of years, where it was used in coal makeup in ancient Egypt. And it does still have modern uses, such as a flame retardant or in batteries, among a bunch of other things. On today's episode of Yeah, That's a Thing That Exists, the Phronimas, also known as the pram bugs. This is a Phronima, and this is quite a close-up image of them. They are rather tiny in actuality, but they are also very weird. They are aquatic and they're a type of amphipod, which is a type of crustacean, but they are also parasitoids, meaning that they enter a host, kill them, and then live off of that host's body. In this case, that host is a salp. So what happens, the female pram bug will find a salp, chew it open, and kind of scoop out and eat its insides. Salps are kind of these just gelatinous little floating tunicate guys, so they can't really do much to avoid this horrible fate. So after hollowing out and living in this poor, unfortunate salp, the female pram bug, which is not a real bug, just saying, will then lay eggs. The mother pram bug will then kind of push the hollowed out corpse of the salp around the ocean, just kind of hanging out until the eggs hatch and mature into the full adult pram bugs. The full mature pram bugs will then emerge from their original host to go find a brand new salp to excavate and continue this whole process. Parasitoids tend to have some of the weirdest and freakiest life cycles that I have ever heard of, and these ones in specific may have been part of the inspiration for the xenomorphs in... is it Alien? I don't know, I haven't seen it. Here's another mushroom, the Ghoul fungus. The Ghoul fungus is kind of a basic looking mushroom found in multiple areas of Australia. And it's called the Ghoul fungus because its preferred habitat is growing on the carcasses of dead animals. As you can see here, there's multiple different bones. There's a vertebrae and what looks like perhaps a leg bone, as well as this mushroom up here. This has kind of earned it the classification as a sarcophilous fungus, meaning flesh-loving. It's most commonly cited as growing on dead birds or small mammals, but as you can imagine, it will grow on pretty much anything containing flesh. I couldn't really find anything specific on whether or not this exact mushroom is poisonous, but I did find that multiple others in the same family are poisonous, so I wouldn't recommend eating the corpse fungus. This is a blister beetle. There are quite a few different species of them, and this is one of them. Blister beetles are found pretty much worldwide on every continent except for Antarctica, and one of the unifying factors of a blister beetle is the incredibly painful blisters that they produce as a defense mechanism. A lot of blister beetles have the aposematic coloring, which is basically like, hey, I'm toxic, I hurt, don't touch me, please. And usually it is effective, but if a predator or something still decides to disturb them, then they release this toxic substance that causes very, very painful blisters on pretty much any surface that is touched by it. The main toxic chemical in the substance produced by the blister beetles is cantharidin. It's incredibly potent and incredibly painful and causes raised welts and blisters which can burst and hemorrhage on pretty much any surface that it touches, be that internally or externally. So if you get it in your mouth or ingest any of it, it will also cause these internal blisters that can burst and cause hemorrhaging. What's interesting though is that historically, cantharidin produced via these blister beetles was used as both a poison and an aphrodisiac. Most of the cantharidin was produced by this beetle, the Spanish fly, which is a type of blister beetle that's found in Eurasia. The dead beetle carcasses would then be ground up into a powder which would be mixed with a number of different things for different effects. For use as a poison, it was sometimes mixed with things such as arsenic or lead acetate to produce a very potent and painful poison. Or as an aphrodisiac, a small amount of it was mixed with things like wine in order to produce the necessary effects of an aphrodisiac. Apparently, it was quite effective for both uses. I will not say the effects of it as an aphrodisiac, or else this video might get taken down. But as a poison, it caused, again, that internal blistering and hemorrhaging and caused a lot of internal bleeding. The most immediate and noticeable effects was a very strong burning sensation, followed by the actual blistering of the skin and other surfaces. Even after very, very, very brief contact with one of these surfaces, and then later at higher doses would cause things like multiple organ failure. as well as bloody vomit and diarrhea and general hemorrhaging, which was not good. It's no longer approved for use as an aphrodisiac and was never really approved as a poison, but now it still does have some modern uses as a wart remover. Let's talk about another poison, La Cantarella. La Cantarella was a historical poison mix that was allegedly used by the Borgia family to poison kind of all of their enemies. The Borgias were a very important noble family in Renaissance Italy, and thus they kind of had a lot of enemies and also a rather bad reputation. And their alleged poison of choice was La Cantarella. Now, the actual recipe for this supposed poison doesn't exist, but it was thought to be a mix of a couple different poisons. It supposedly contained things like phosphorus, arsenic, and lead acetate, also known as sugar of lead. It also potentially, according to some sources, contained the toxin known as cantharidin, which was historically used as an aphrodisiac, but is also incredibly toxic. Reportedly, La Cantarella was a white powder that was sprinkled onto food or in wine and had apparently a very nice taste, probably due to the lead acetate. Symptoms likely included largely gastrointestinal effects like vomiting, diarrhea, and nausea, quickly followed by death. The Borgias were kind of not well liked, apparently, and thought to be brutal and just overall depraved individuals. However, they were still a very important family, so if you were invited over to their place for a dinner party, you pretty much had to go, even though there was a strong likelihood that you would be poisoned. I did find one source that said a potential cause of Rodrigo Borgia, who was the Pope at the time, was that he accidentally poisoned himself by pouring and drinking from the wrong glass of poisoned wine, where he meant to give it to a dinner guest but instead gave it to himself, thus poisoning himself. However, that was only one source that I found, and multiple other sources claim that his death was instead caused by malaria. Either way, La Cantarella poison, which does not look like this picture, but I couldn't really find a good picture, is a very interesting historical poison that would definitely be incredibly effective. It's been a while since we've talked about a nerve agent, so let's talk about Soman. I think I'm saying that correctly, let me know if I'm not. Soman is another type of nerve agent that was discovered after sarin and is actually very, very similar in structure and function to sarin. All nerve agents affect the nervous system, and quite a few of them act on the same types of enzymes, cholinesterases. A lot of them affect specifically the acetylcholinesterase, the enzyme responsible for breaking down acetylcholine, which is a very strong neurotransmitter. Soman, when pure, is very volatile, which means it vaporizes or turns into a gas quite easily, which is a problem. It's also corrosive and incredibly toxic. Usually it's a colorless or kind of yellowish liquid, but again, it can vaporize very easily or be aerosolized and used as a spray. Once it comes in contact with a mucous membrane, such as the eyes, mouth, or lungs when inhaled, or even skin, then issues start to arise. The enzymes are then inhibited, and very quickly symptoms start appearing. The first one is meiosis, or the contraction of the pupils. Then other symptoms such as extreme muscle pain, vomiting, and difficulty controlling your limbs, and also just other nervous system functions start to show up. Symptoms usually start within 10 or so minutes depending on the individual and can last for multiple days. However, long-lasting psychological effects such as depression, anxiety, and nightmares have been noted for up to 6 months or so after exposure. Now, luckily, there is an antidote, and if administered, the effects usually are not fatal. However, supportive treatment to kind of get through the toxic phase is definitely needed, and again, there usually are at least some sort of long-lasting side effects. However, like pretty much all other nerve agents, if left untreated, it can be fatal, and it does have quite a low LD50, meaning it is very, very toxic. And again, like most other nerve agents, it is considered to be a chemical weapon, and mass storage and manufacture of it is not allowed because these are very, very nasty chemicals. This incredibly fluffy guy is the southern flannel moth. It's native to quite a few different areas. It can be found in the eastern and southern United States, as well as Central America and the northernmost parts of South America. The adult moths are completely harmless to humans, and they are very, very cute and fluffy. This is the equally fluffy but significantly more dangerous southern flannel moth caterpillar. This is the larval form of the southern flannel moth, and hidden beneath all of that gray fuzz are a large number of venomous spines. As soon as the back fluffy area of the caterpillar is touched, a bunch of very sharp spines immediately stick into whatever happened to touch this caterpillar, and causes an immediate, very, very bad reaction. It starts out with very intense localized pain on the area of the sting that's described as very similar to a broken bone or blunt force trauma. Now, if you're lucky, the pain will stay localized to the area of the sting. However, if you're not lucky, it can then spread throughout multiple other areas of the body, causing the same amount of pain. In addition to the severe pain itself, a sting can also cause other symptoms like skin irritation or a physical rash or blister around the area of the sting, as well as symptoms such as nausea, dizziness, shortness of breath, as well as things like headache and chest pain. As for treatment, a lot of these sources vary. The kind of first thing you want to do is immediately remove all of the spines that you can, which is somewhat easily done with like sticky tape, so stick some tape onto the area and then pull it off, and hopefully all of the spines will come with it. Then you also want to wash and clean the area with cool water and soap, and then from there the treatments tend to vary. Some people say ice packs work, some people say isopropyl alcohol, some sources say take antihistamines to help with the rash and swelling, some say use baking soda and water on the area, but I couldn't find any consistent source, so I don't know how many of these work or what the recommended treatment is beyond removing the spines and washing the area. As far as I could find, there are no recorded sources of deaths caused by touching these caterpillars, and that being said, that's not something you should do. You shouldn't go just touch these things for funsies. The adult moth should be okay because they don't have these venomous spines. However, don't touch the caterpillar. But if you do happen to touch one of these accidentally, most likely you will be fine once the area is taken care of and the venom has worn off, unless there's a severe allergic reaction, in which case you should definitely go to the emergency room. You most likely will be fine after a couple of hours, or in worst case scenario, days of some discomfort. On today's episode of Yeah, That's a Thing That Exists, the payara. This is the payara, a fish of many names, including the vampire fish and the saber-toothed tetra. They are native to the Amazon basin in South America, largely Brazil, but also found in multiple other places and countries as well. They're described as being incredibly aggressive predators, eating pretty much anything they can catch, including things like smaller fish, as well as reptiles and amphibians in the water. They're also occasionally kept in aquariums as companions for other large and aggressive fish, so they don't all eat each other. And they're also a decently common source of food, and apparently taste pretty good, even though they are kind of a bitch to catch. They can also get decently large, usually maxing out at about a foot long, sometimes a foot and a half, but the largest recorded payara was over 3.5 feet long. Now, despite their large size and large fangs and reported aggression, there are, as far as I'm aware, very few payara attacks on humans and no recorded fatalities.